Council, my name is Harry Zavos. I'm a citizen of Glendale, and usually I don't like to use names, but tonight I must do so. At the June 21st meeting, Councilman Najarian suggested that oral communication change its name to State Your Hatred. He mentioned 4 people as exemplifying that and talked about 3 of them, Margaret, Hammond, Mr. Hooker, and Herbert Molano. At the next council meeting, Margaret Hammond and Lenore Solis took him to task over these personal attacks, and he responded that he was disturbed by a despicable racial slur against Armenians that was made from the audience during oral communication. And Mr. Najarian, I couldn't agree with you more. That was indeed a hateful remark. Mr. Najarian justified these attacks and labeling these people as full of hate because he was disturbed by that racial slur, and he couldn't dust it off, but he had to speak up. As one who is proud of his ethnic heritage, I have no doubt as to Mr. Najarian's pride in his. I do not doubt that he is sincerely and deeply offended by hateful attacks on Armenians and has moved to speak out against them. I believe that. But on June 21st, he never used the actual word hate with regard to Mr. Hooker. He was highly critical of him. With Margaret Hammond, he did use a word and said she exuded hatred when she spoke about those people. With regard to Herbert Molano, by count, he used the word 8 times and spent most of his time talking about Mr. Molano. Now, I only know Margaret Hammond from interacting with her at public meetings, but if my memory serves me correct, she was a staunch supporter of a good friend of mine for city office who happens to be Armenian. On the other hand, I do know Mr. Molano as a personal friend and have socialized with him and have had coffee with him, and I do not detect any ethnic hatred in this man for any group, let alone Armenians. Indeed, I would have all of you, including Mr. Najarian, look at the April 3rd Masis Post, an Armenian weekly that is also online, to see an article published by Mr. Molano there, a very moving article about the Armenian genocide. And if you go to that article, you'll also see that his daughter was one of only 2 non-Armenians in her class at Glendale High School that took the Armenian language program. Now, I believe that elected officials in their public comments have to be more careful about labeling people who disagree with them as haters in the context of trying to defend attacks on Armenians. I believe that because it does a disservice to many of them, like Mr. Molano, who is 180 directions in the other direction in terms of that, and is very sympathetic to what the Armenian people were put through during the genocide. It can unfairly tarnish their reputation with some people. And more importantly, Mr. Najarian, it can take, and I want to emphasize this, what I sincerely believe is a deep and abiding concern about negative comments, hateful comments made against Armenians, and make it appear counterfeit, even though it's genuine, because it makes it look like a political ploy to be able to attack people with whom you disagree. And frankly, you're smarter than that. It just doesn't do you any political good.
Thank you. I'm going to close oral communications. Do we have any council responses? Mr. Najarian?
just to respond to Mr. Zavos. I never stated that Mr. Molano's hatred was a hatred against any particular ethnic group. And I believe my comments are well recorded on that particular date. However, I did state against whom I felt Mr. Molano had that hatred. I think I was probably at the top of his list. I don't think anyone can doubt that. He has most recently referred to me as a cockroach, as to lower than a cockroach. I felt he had a disdain. Let's use the word disdain, because maybe hatred gets us a little on edge. A disdain for the actions of the City Council as a whole. He had a disdain towards the city unions and their current contracts. He had a disdain towards the city manager and other department heads. But I never stated he had a disdain toward the Armenians. I didn't suggest that everyone is stating the same hatred during that portion of oral communications. I would perhaps clarify that there's a different flavor of disdain from each of the prior speakers. As far as Margaret goes, I don't want to get into what Margaret's issues are. Privately, I can speak with you and explain to you some eyewitness issues that I have had with her. But no, Mr. Molano, I do not believe as any ethnic bigotry or any racism at all. So that if it came out like that, it was a mistake. Perhaps I was following too closely with his comments to Mr. Hooker's. But just for the record, that's what I meant to say if it was not clearly conveyed.